Welcome to another episode with Perspectives with Asama Silva. As you have watched in many of my other episodes, we've covered human rights violations such as in China with the Uyghur community. We've talked about the Burma situation with the Rohingya. Today we have two guests that are going to enlighten us about what is really going on in India, not just with Kashmir, but India as a whole. Just full disclosure, we, three of us along with two other members, just returned back from having a meeting with Congressman McGovern, talking about this particular issue and asking for his help and his insight into this issue that's happening in India. And my two guests today, they're actually coming from New York and New Jersey, so thank you for joining us in person today. Let me introduce you. This is Dr. Sana Qutubuddin from New York. She is with both of them are with the Indian American Muslim Council, but Dr. Sana also works with the United Nations. Mohammed Jawad is also as the General National Secretary with the Indian American Muslim Council. Thank you both for coming today.
Thank you for welcoming us.
And so, when we were talking about taping this particular episode, what interested me the most, and I would like you to just start the conversation and run with it. We always, as Americans, sitting at home, when we think of India, we're always thinking of exotic. We're thinking of delicious foods, spices, curry, the beautiful colors, the clothing, and if anything, Bollywood, that brings in the culture of music and dance and the love stories and whatnot. But lately I'm hearing a lot more of violence and a lot more of division in terms of religion. Many people assume that India is a Hindu majority country or all Hindus, which it is not. It is a very multi-faith country. But what I would like both of you to enlighten us is we have this image as Americans, but we don't know this other side. And so with our show named Perspectives, this is the point of this show, is to really bring enlightenment to the other side of those stories. So if you'd like to begin, Dr. Sana, if you'd like to start on what the situation looks like in India.
Sure. I mean, I would say that, there's still incredible beauty in India. I mean, the history is ancient. I mean, even though the modern state as it is new, but the region, the history of the region is ancient, and there's great diversity and beauty in that diversity. And that diversity has always existed, even before it was consolidated into what's modern day India. And I think that vision for India that Gandhi had of an inclusive India where all people were equal, regardless of faith or caste before the law, is something that is certainly still beautiful about India. And the times that we're in now, unfortunately, have been really challenging Gandhi's vision for India that was about inclusivity, that was about respecting diversity. So now we have a situation where for the last 5 years, we have somebody that committed genocide against his own people of Muslims in Gujarat in 2002 that came to power 5 years ago. And he was just reelected. And he and his administration and the BJP is the party that he comes from, that he represents, have really normalized hatred and violence against India's minority communities. So when we think about India today, certainly it's not a monolith, and that's something that makes India so vibrant and so beautiful. The population of Muslims, Dalits, Christians, Sikhs, our populations together make up about half of the Indian population. And with this Hindutva ideology, Hindutva, let me explain, is this ideology that the BJP party that is in power today is inspired by. And that ideology was developed about a little over 90 years ago by this man named Savarkar. And Savarkar had a vision for India that was an India that was for Hindus only. and that there shouldn't be anybody that isn't a Hindu. And he was, in fact, inspired by Hitler at that time. He wrote letters to Hitler, and he wrote letters in admiration for Hitler's vision. And today, Mein Kampf is one of the top-selling books in India. You see it being sold all throughout India. It's one of the top-selling books, and it's a cause for concern because in addition to the party in power, idealizing such fascist elements, history books have been rewritten in India, and Hitler is greatly heralded in modern-day Indian textbooks. So Martin Luther King Jr., his legacy has been, he was always a part of Indian public school textbooks because of his relationship and his inspiration, being inspired by Gandhi. And now Hitler is in a lot of history textbooks, public school textbooks. So this is a very dangerous turn. And
when you just ask, when you say in public school textbooks,
yes,
in a positive light or in a negative light?
It's in a positive light. So Hitler is referred to as a very strong leader that was very positive for his country and that did, great infrastructure projects and whatnot. So that's why it is so dangerous that he's being referred to in such a light. And so it was Savarkar's colleague, a member of his RSS party. The RSS is the ideological branch of the political party, BJP.
Okay.
It was his colleague, in fact, that assassinated the founding father of India, Gandhi. And so we have a party in power today that is directly responsible for the assassination for the founding visionary of the country. And there is so much violence that's taking place against all of India's minority and cultural communities, in addition to the news media, journalists, human rights activists, environmental activists, women's rights. It's been a downward spiral, unfortunately, as this party has taken power. A small story that sort of highlights how incendiary and how invasive the nature of the hatred is to give you an example of this young Indian woman that was kidnapped from her home, held against her will for 3.5 weeks in a anti-conversion clinic that was being housed in a yoga center. She was kidnapped, this young Hindu woman, because she was married to a Christian man. And in that anti-conversion clinic, she was being counseled to either leave her Christian husband or to force him to convert to Hinduism. And when she escaped from this, she saw so many hundreds of other women within the anti-conversion clinic that she was being housed in. But she blew the cover off of all of these anti-conversion clinics that are still operating. And the thing is that these are government-affiliated they're government affiliates.
What exactly does that mean, anti-conversion? What are they preventing someone? Are they preventing people from converting out of Hinduism?
Yes,
or
both.
Both, okay.
So preventing people from converting out of Hinduism, as well as preventing interfaith relationships from forming. So it's very much like Handmaid's Tale. It's the reach of the government is everywhere. And another situation where a village of 45,000 Christian people were basically, there was a BJP-affiliated gang that was bullying this village for about 4 months until there was this mass conversion after 4 months of being bullied and they said that they declared that they were Hindu at that point. And a BJP Minister of Parliament heralded this as a success and said that this is a Christian-free village. And so these types of crimes are happening, are rampant, and the government is celebrating those that are committing these types of crimes. There was another situation where a union minister, Mr. Singh, I think he's from Massachusetts, in fact, he, which is so disturbing, but he had a ceremony where he celebrated and garlanded, he put flowers on the killers of these 7 men who lynched a Muslim man to death. And so all of this type of hatred is being normalized by those in the highest realms of power. Another
Before we go
Yeah.
on, before you mention
Yeah.
that one, when you said Mr. Singh was from Massachusetts, do
Yes.
you mean he lived here? Did he go to school here?
Yes,
I mean,
he has a house in Massachusetts. I believe his family lives in Massachusetts, and he's also involved with Indian politics.
Okay.
I think he lives close to Worcester.
Worcester.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, you were mentioning another incident of what kind of the picture, painting the picture of what's going on in India.
Yeah, I think I was talking about mob lynchings of, all of these crimes being normalized, and what that does is it just creates an atmosphere where there's rampant fear and there's a lack of stability. So it's just a very it's a very sad time for human rights and religious freedom for all people in India.
To paint the severity of the situation, what's the percentage of Hindus versus the other faiths or minorities?
So about, I would say it's like 60-40.
Yeah.
So 60% Hindus and 40% are Muslims, Christians,
Sikhs, Buddhists, Dalits, yeah.
I think Dalits are, more than, maybe 40 something, like 10% or something.
Okay. And now have this 40% started maybe collaborating, organizing, creating coalitions to stop some of what the 60, I'm assuming all of 60% of the Hindu population is not necessarily BJP party or from that party and that ideology. So from that 60%, how much percentage are we talking about? That's probably supporting this ideology.
So let me just start with thanking you for welcoming us here. And basically, we represent Indian American Muslim Council, which actually fights for the rights of minorities in India. One thing I want to clarify before I begin is we are not anti-India or anti-Hindu, right? It's a Hindutva ideology which we are fighting for, right? So we have a lot of coalition partners here and also in India. We work with, like Sana said, like basically we have Hindus, progressive Hindus who are actually part of our, our like coalition. We have Dalits, Christians, everybody. What's happening in India is, anybody who actually sides with the minorities, they're being basically put in jails or being killed. So there's the fear the government, the current Hindutva ideology government, RSS, BJP government is creating is basically so fearsome. It's almost impossible for anybody to stand with us. So stand with minorities, and the way it's difficult to fight within India. So that's why I think we are trying to basically work in US here, where basically we can work with the congressmen and other like-minded people to put pressure and maybe influence the policies. So India can at least listen to like an international community and say, okay, the human rights violations which are going on right now, even in Kashmir, if you take a look at it, like 30 days, we don't know what's going on in Kashmir. It might be a genocide going on, or it might be basically, we don't even know until it gets like somebody, the reporters goes there or somebody can go there.
So, well, the questions that I'm asking is to really understand what percent of the population is really running, with this ideology.
Yeah, I think 30% actually was 33 or something.
It was like 31% that originally voted the BJP into power. he was reelected with a much higher margin, so that's scary. Because I think one thing is that hateful ideology and rhetoric really just like has been absorbed, like amongst a lot of people, and it's dangerous because, I mean, I remember just visiting the villages the different villages that my parents are from in India growing up outside of Hyderabad, and people were so, you know, it was just beautiful. People had so much love for each other. And now I go to the same villages that, you know, my parents were raised in, and there's just so much, like, animosity towards, you know, each other, and it just shows you, like, how much, like, the communal rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric
Right.
that the BJP is pushing has really just, like, sunken in and really impacted the way people treat each other, you know, and that's to me so
I have an
sad.
example, like, you know, I was born and raised in India, right? So I'm from India, and like you said initially, India has been a great place to live with, and it was nice. But the friends who went to school with me, right now I'm in the WhatsApp group, and the hatred, like Sana said, like, you know, I see so much hatred nets from them in those messages. They basically bash Muslims, and they know I'm in the group actually. So there are a lot of other Muslim friends in the group, but they go into so like anti-Muslim rhetoric there. I'm like, you know, we have to remind them, guys, like, we actually grown together with you. We were friends. We are still friends. You know, it's like, but I think the whole ideology is so much into, you know, ingrained into these people. They're not saying anything else. They're basically blindly going with that ideology for some reason. It is difficult to understand why they adopted that ideology, but it looks like they're liking it. It looks like basically, even in US, actually, it's influencing a lot of the people, Indian Americans here who are like they're BJP supporters. You know, there's a lot of stuff coming here, like the textbooks. I think we talked about being like curriculum for children are being changed. The Muslim stuff is being taken out. The Hindutva ideology is being, like, you know, slowly floated around. So it is difficult in this environment, like, basically. So I think, you know, even the congressman said the same thing, right?
Right.
So we had, so it's difficult. It's getting more and more difficult.
So could you review or like tell us about and enlighten us about what's happening in Assam?
So in Assam, the government just declared that there are, well, basically they declared 1.9 million people to be stateless, and this is a dangerous move because you have these people that have lived in India all their lives, born and raised there, and who no longer have a nation to call home, and that's the only home that they've ever known. And keeping in mind, this is a very ancient civilization, and you know, there's always been constant migration patterns, but for 2 million people, about 2 million people, to no longer have a place, you know, where they're guaranteed their civil liberties, it's a dangerous precedent that the Indian government is setting, and it's paving the path towards genocide. Amongst the 1.9 million people that are not on the National Registration of Citizens list are the family members of a former president of India, the names of India's former retired military generals and their families, as well as currently serving military members and their families.
And do they all happen to be Muslim?
They all happen to be Muslim. And India has just begun today building one of its largest detention camps, and I believe it's going to be one of the largest detention camps in the world. And this is coming at a time where in the region there is already the Rohingya genocide happening at its borders or within the region, and the influx of migration of stateless communities is going to wreak havoc on the international community. But what this really is sending a message is that clearly there are people on that list that should not be on, or clearly there are people that are not on that list that clearly should be. The entire exercise is futile because the way that you're asking the least privileged group of people in India that live in a place where there is annual flooding, and a majority of the homes in this area get flooded out, and the people basically survive with their lives, just with their lives, and to start anew every single year. And you're asking these people to provide documentation of their birth and their parents' birth. It's impossible. But there is certainly the way they're connected to their communities and the histories. It's clear that they are Indian citizens. And people from the BJP party are saying that they will now want to institute a nationwide NRC list, and that again is just to wreak havoc on India's minority communities, questioning their citizenship, where they belong, and really psychologically to really unravel people about where it is they belong in this world. I mean, think about it, like to not know where you belong and to constantly just feel insecure about, well, I don't know if I can stay here or not. That completely impacts the way you live each day. Right. That insecurity could just destroy a person. And that is exactly why the government is doing what it's doing.
And especially I think when they're born and brought up there, right? So it's not like, you're asking somebody who migrated. People were born and the generations lived there, like the president's family, and you're asking them to prove themselves, basically citizenship. And in India, I think, as you know, maybe the record keeping was not accurate, and with no computers or anything, right? So it's difficult to go back and get all birth certificates and all the information. So it's basically they're actually singling out Muslim populations mainly.
Okay. What do you see as steps forward?
I would say steps forward would be to scrap the whole NRC exercise, because they're making it seem like initially there were 4 million people on it, now there are 1.9 million people on it. Like it's this, exercise of really discerning who belongs in India and who doesn't. But it's really an exercise of psychologically unraveling its least privileged population. And that doesn't lead to any good for anyone. And so I'd suggest a way forward would certainly be to scrap that exercise. Also to allow the Supreme Court to do the work that they do without being meddled with. Last year, the Supreme Court of India held a press conference for the first time in its history. And they asked the government to not meddle in their affairs. So the adjudication of the law...
So the judges of the Supreme Court actually had a press conference.
So the adjudication of the law needs to be done without bias,
right,
and to respect the institutions that deliberate. And so I think that's really critical in a path forward, is to see justice being delivered. Very recently, a Pehlu Khan who was lynched by a mob, and it was all recorded on video. All of those that lynched him, who were clearly lynching him to death, in the video, you can see their faces. They went to trial, they were all there, they were all acquitted on charges that they had lynched him, even though it was clear as day who was responsible for his murder. So re-examining, opening up these cases and trying them with with justice being respected is key in order to build a foundation of law and order, and to give people a sense of security and stability. And that's not only for India's minorities, that's for everyone.
Right. So you
One
answered.
thing to add to
Yep.
that, I think I want to ask the people of in U.S. right, basically.
That was going to be my question, is
Okay.
what can people in the U.S. also
Yeah,
do?
so
You gave us an answer of what India
India
can
can do,
do.
right?
What can people in the
People
U.S.
in the U.S. actually have to basically, like-minded people, it doesn't matter which caste you belong to, because we're not looking at one caste, or we're fighting for the constitutional rights. So we need to go to our congressmen and senators, elected officials in U.S. actually, and talk to them and say how we can influence the policies in India. That's the only way I think basically we can work on advocacy work, right? Because it's difficult, like I said before, in India it's difficult for you to voice any opinion because those are being shut down, or those basically there's no voice in India right now. The media is gone. All the secularist people or the activists are being put in jail for one reason or the other. So I think people in U.S. or international community can actually approach UN on the human rights violations which are going on, and there is a lot of proof what's happening in India. So we need to go talk to our elected officials and educate them and say, okay, these are the activities going on in India. So India is not, like you said, it's all hunky-dory from here. The people are being, the minorities are being, basically constantly being attacked and stuff like that. So that has to be happening from here in U.S. and also from all over the world.
We have less than a minute, but one last question. Why should an American who doesn't have any ties to India, as an Indian American Muslim, I can say, yes, I feel your pain, I understand. I mean, I am also of Indian ethnicity, I understand what you're talking about. But why would, as an American who doesn't have any ties or direct ties to India, be so concerned when we have issues domestically already? Or we have so many other issues throughout the world, be it China, be it in the Arab countries, be it in Southeast Asia. Why would this have or take my attention?
This should take everyone's attention, because you have a government that has a clearly fascist manifesto that it's operating off of, that is leading a country of 1.3 billion people. And that government is pushing hate. And nobody's living in a vacuum, So all of that hatred does not exist in a vacuum. We talk about ISIS. ISIS is just real, and ISIS pushes hate and demagoguery. It's a dangerous force. You have that type of same energy running a nation of 1.3 billion people. You can't escape the forces of hate. In the United States, you have those same forces that are pushing hatred in India, trying to push Islamophobic assertions, inaccurate assertions about Sikhs and Indian Christians into US textbooks. That's going to impact ignorance and awareness about these issues in the United States. They're trying to remove the history and the study of the caste system in US textbooks. So that is impacting the future generations of children in this country and their awareness of the realities of the world. And secondly, we have plenty of examples of what happens when hate is not countered by radical love. There were these 2 Indian men that were killed in Kansas several years ago. I think it was 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, and they were killed by a man that thought they were Muslim. And it was incredibly tragic. And the thing is that they were BJP supporters in India as well. So hatred doesn't just sort of end on its own. It's
spilling into U.S. basically. That's the main reason, right? So it's going to impact all people here in the U.S.
So we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. Another episode of Perspectives, and as usually I finish with a comment of my own, and I think Sana, basically, I'm going to take her quote. Hatred has no borders, it has no lines, and if we don't pay attention to this, even if it is happening in another country across the ocean, it will at some point in time start leaking into our country. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you join us again.